self-governance, good judgment, meta-learning, that's what I said about the metacognition, social ability, emotional, social intelligence, refining values so they are developing their character, and also the emotional development. Now, for me, that really coins a holistic approach.
Yeah.
And if we look at ourselves as the holistic educator of the 21st century, I do think nowadays all of us are training into areas that we never even imagined before. Before, we were language educators, and that's what we learned. We learned to be teachers. We learned to come into that space. All of the teacher training very much focused on the language learning. Now we're going around that with educational neuroscience, neuroeducation, mind, brain, and education science, emotional intelligence, social intelligence, psychology. Even, I know that a lot of our Ukrainian teachers, and Olena, you're going to confirm this with me, a lot of you are coming into trauma-informed teaching as well. So we know that we need much, much more. And all of this actually does start with us. It's about us understanding so much more. And from the beginning, I was always fascinated with, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between teaching, training, coaching? And in fact, neurolanguage coaching is almost like an intersection of teaching, coaching, plus the neuro. And in the neuro, I want to bring in all of the neuroscience, neuropsychology, neuroeducation, emotional intelligence, psychology. So it really is encompassing everything. And back in 2017, in the first edition of the book, Neurolanguage Coaching, which has been edited and rewritten in 2025, I launched that last year. There is a table that highlights the differences between teaching and coaching. Now, I confess on the teaching side, you don't see that here. You can find that in the book. But on the teaching side, it is very conservative. There are still places that follow a very conservative way of teaching. But as I said, many of you are intuitively coming into the coach approach, which is about active learners, learner autonomy. They take the ownership. It's about us being flexible, adapting to them, personalizing everything to them. Now, this is fine if you've got one-to-one clients. When you've got groups, smaller groups, it's fine. But when you are working with bigger groups in schools, it really requires a lot of creativity. And also, I'm hoping that little by little, the way that schools are managed, they will start to understand that smaller groups are going to be much more effective. We can only hope for that. I know that a lot of teachers are burnt out and stressed because of the burden that they carry with bigger groups. Now, as we go through the webinar, you'll see that we totally changed the way we communicate. So teaching, as in directive style teaching, is really minimalized when you come into a coaching approach. And there's a lot of stimulation from our side, a lot of positive feedback. There's a lot of adaptability and flexibility and spontaneity. And I always think that neurolanguage coaches learn the skill of having a structure, but being spontaneous. And that's the skill to master. How can I have a structure and still be spontaneous at the same time? And another thing that we're now moving into is our accountability. Our question to ourselves after every single session with a learner should be, how cost effective was that? How much did my learner take away today? How much did they learn? And this is the new measurement. It's not about them adapting to us. It's about us adapting to them. And it's not how well we do or how much we know or how good we are. It's about how much they take away from our sessions. And just as a summary before we start, and we're going to dive into both of these. On the one side, we are integrating professional coach training. We are accredited by the International Coach Federation. Therefore, we follow their standards, their guidelines, and their ethics in the coaching profession. We're integrating the structure from coaching, setting goals, working on them, goal review, setting goals, working on them, goal review. We're integrating coaching conversations to troubleshoot emotional triggers, learning how to learn, commitment problems, motivation problems, time management problems, improving cognitive skills. So these are mini coaching conversations that spontaneously come out when we need them. Plus, we're integrating the competences of coaching. The way that we communicate is different, and the spirit of coaching as well. Now, we're going to go a little bit deeper into coaching in a minute. From the neuro side, we're integrating the principles, the findings, and the research from the neuroscience. We're integrating this into the process. It's almost like we are embodying the research. In addition, we're opening up the space to talk with our learners about the brain, about learning, about them. Every single brain is different. I need to find out what works for you. You need to find out what works for you. And we're really bringing in the mirror, the metacognition. We're talking about how the brain reacts, how the brain learns, how the brain functions. We're adapting it. We're introducing that emotional intelligence. So from the two sides, this is what is converging into the method and approach, neurolanguage coaching. And nowadays, when I started this in 2012, nobody had any concept or idea about language coaching. And when I launched this at the beginning, there were a lot of questions. I remember a professor in Canada calling me up saying, Rachel, what is this? Talk to me about this. And by the way, he then sent me about 20 of his teachers from a university in Canada. And we were training them over the years 2013 to 2016. What are the key differences? Key differences are language coaching per se is a generic concept. Neurolanguage coaching is a structured concept and approach. You can even call it a method because it has a systematic way of working. Language coaching isn't about coming into a session and saying to a learner, what do you want to do today? Not at all with us. Neurolanguage coaching is about, let's do a first session. Let's find out where your problems are, what you want to achieve. Let's create your program based on what you think you need, based on what we're discovering together. And together we co-create a personalized agenda and roadmap for every single learner. We're not wasting time. We're focusing in on what they need and what they want. So it's a very structured process. And our first session, I'm going to say, is a hallmark. We have a very specific, different first session with a client. And that first session is the gateway to everything that comes afterwards. And as I mentioned, along the way, we're troubleshooting with coaching conversations. We're talking to our learners about the brain. We're bringing out emotional intelligence. For us, the utmost essential point is psychological safety. Language learning is, it puts us into a state of vulnerability. All of us. All of you, I imagine, have learned languages. myself, I know 5 languages down the line, I know how vulnerable I felt learning languages. And I never want my learners to feel that. I never want them to feel bad. I always want them to come into this process with joy, happiness, playfulness. And even with grammar, understanding how to create a space of curiosity in grammar is key. One thing that we do promote a lot is the connection between the languages. Now, the University of Maryland, they're actually now calling this language bridging. I've been promoting this for the last 14 years because that's exactly how I've learned my languages, by springboarding from language to language to language. So what we become provocateur. We become stimulators. How is that in your language? How is it different? How is it similar? So these are the key differences with neurolanguage coaching. Now we're going to dive a little bit deeper, but firstly, I do want to go into the theory first. And I'm starting with this quote because I think all of us can recognize that we don't really like to be told what to do. And so Winston phrased this beautifully. I'm always ready to learn. I don't like to be taught. And when we think about each and every one of us, and we look at the neuroscience, there is one thing that I think we need to really, really understand. No two brains are the same. The way that we function, maybe, yes, is exactly the same. But the neuroscientists actually say that 1/3 of our brain is the genetic imprint. And the rest is what we have learned, lived, experienced through life. Whenever I say this, for me, it's a profound statement because my genetic third is totally different to any of you. My life has been totally different to any of you. And as an educator, that really makes me respect and honor that every person in front of me may have a totally different perspective, a totally different way of receiving information, interpreting information. How do we do that? We really need to start to get to know our learners, but we also need to help them to know themselves. Coaching per se is very much grounded in self-determination theory. Back in the 1980s, 1990s, 2 psychologists, Deci and Ryan, created this theory based on our core needs to thrive. The core psychological needs for each and every one of us are feeling in control of our behavior and goals, autonomy. Feeling that we can master and achieve competence. And feeling that we belong, relatedness. And when these 3 are fulfilled, we start to experience intrinsic motivation, well-being, and personal growth. And they've done a lot of research through the years proving these needs. And in fact, that ties in with the top of the pyramid of Maslow, self-actualization, achieving our full potential, living life authentically. Now, in many ways, professional coaching is promoting all of these points. This is what we want our coachees to discover and achieve. Now, if we move a little bit further into the theory, self-directed learning as well is key, and a key theory that coaching is also grounded on. Because again, we're looking at learner autonomy, We're looking at how to get them to tap into their intrinsic motivation. We're helping them to discover their resources. We're not telling them what to do. We're not giving them stuff. We're trying to get them to determine what works for them. And we're also promoting that self-monitoring, that mirror, so that they start to adjust and adapt to their own learning strategies. And another theory that is absolutely, neurolanguage coaching is very much following these 5 stages of Boyatzis intentional change theory. Now, Professor Boyatzis has worked for many, many years in counseling, working with many, many patients. So a lot of field work, a lot of experience, but many, many years with this theory in the making. And over the last 20 years, a lot of research proving how we can achieve sustained change. Now, when you think about it, learning is sustained change. There are 5 stages to this theory. The first stage is, what is the ideal self? Now, when you think about this in a learning environment, what is the vision for this learning? What's it going to bring them? What doors it will open for them? Where will it take them? What are they going to achieve? And they need to be very clear on that. And we are helping them to connect into that vision. Second stage is to understand, well, where are you now? Where are you? What's the current starting point? And let's talk about your strengths, your weaknesses. Let's talk about your awareness of self. Next stage, we are setting out that learning agenda. So together with our learners, we are co-creating, we're creating the bridge to get them from the real to the ideal. And then we move into implementation, experimenting, practicing, engaging, doing, learning. And all through this, we, the coach, are the resonant relationship. We are the supporting relationship that is helping them, giving them the feedback, and really moving them more and more towards that vision. And a lot of research along the way, how emotional intelligence is key to learning. Boyatzis talks about the positive emotional attractor state, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later with the research. Which, when you get them into this positive state, it really does foster the learning. And personal vision drives sustainable learning. You know, it's interesting because a lot of the time as teachers, we get very confused with motivation because we confuse the reasons for learning with intrinsic motivation. And I would say most of the time, they're not the same. So when your client comes in and they say, yes, I'm motivated, I need it for work, that's not motivation. That's the reason for learning. We need to find the vision. Okay, imagine you're fluent. Imagine you can 100% use this language at work with no problems, without thinking. How's that going to change your life? I could get a promotion. I could go to another country. That's the vision. That's going to be the driving passion around the learning, not the I need it for work. So in everything that we do, we're now starting to become very, very conscious of our new role as a new type of educator. And as I said to all of you earlier, I do believe that many of you intuitively are coming into this role. And when we go to psychology, we go to transactional analysis, we are really breaking down this traditional teacher-student relationship. The expected interactions are changed. The way that we communicate is going to totally change with our learners. Changing the script, that's what I always say, and we're changing it from directive to non-directive, and I actually call it changing from teacher to coacher. This for me is the new type of educator. Some research back in 2003 talks about high quality connections. Now, this research was actually relating to corporate worlds, the business environment. Personally, I think this is what we are doing as teachers now. We are coming into being these high quality connectors. What does that mean? Well, we build and strengthen their cognitive mechanisms, their emotional mechanisms, and their behavioral mechanisms. That's what we are now doing more than ever. So why is neurolanguage coaching different? Right, let's go into the nitty-gritty here. As I mentioned before, for me, neuro encompasses everything. Because in fact, neuro means nerves, nerve cells. It's not just about the brain. Many people think, oh, neuroscience, the brain, that's it. No. We have nerve cells all over the body. And in fact, there is a part of the body which the scientists call the second brain, and that's the gut. So we could say intuition kicks in this part of the body. And very, very important to understand as well is that the heart also contains neurons. Back in 1991, Dr. Armour, his beautiful research really helped us to understand that the heart is not just a pump. It is much more than that. We're still trying to understand. One very key piece of information is that there are more messages going from the heart to the brain than the brain to the heart. The question is, how are we interpreting these messages? So for me, neuro is again, the holistic. It's the brain, heart, gut, also recognizing that we have nerve cells all over the body. Now, there's a lot of research now also questioning where memories are stored, because there is a question mark now, are memories also stored in the body? Fascinating research coming up over the next years, I think. Now, coming back to why the neuro in neurolanguage coaching, late 1990s and early 2000s, we already started to see research on brain-based learning. And everything in this research is encompassed in neurolanguage coaching. Everything. I'm always intrigued that this research is nearly 30 years old. And it's only now that we're starting to implement it. And this is one of the major problems with the research, the implementation, the embodiment of the research. It's not enough just to regurgitate the theory. It's about living the theory. So we encompass the brain-based learning in everything that we do. And we do this through professional coaching. I always say that this is the communicative vehicle. Back in 2013, Professor Boyatsis plus team, Anthony Jack, the neuroscientist, leading neuroscientist in this research, this was the first time that we had research on the neuroscience of coaching. And 20 students were given coaching sessions. They were given two types of coaching sessions. The first focused on their vision, as we've just mentioned. What do you want to achieve? Where do you want to get to? And the coaching session was called Coaching for Compassion. The other coaching session was focused on the problem. What's the problem? What have you done so far? What's worked? What's not? What's the issue at hand here? This was called Coaching for Compliance. Now, they were given questionnaires, and already in the questionnaires, the coachees shared their different feelings from those coaching sessions. The one which got them into the positive state, the vision, really helped them to feel inspired, motivated, to feel trust and care. The one based on the problem actually stimulated feelings of guilt, obligation. Then they put them into the MRI scans and they played back snippets of these sessions. And that's when they saw the activated areas of the brain in regard to one coaching session or the other. Coaching for compassion, the activation of the visual imaging, the motivation areas, the parasympathetic stress response, the default mode network kicking in as well. Coaching for compliance activated the sympathetic stress response and areas indicating self-consciousness, abrasion, obligation. So it's very clear that when we communicate and how we communicate has an impact on the person who is listening. And let's be honest, as teachers, we often go into that mode of arousing the negative emotional attractor state. Have you done your homework? What's the reason you haven't done your homework? So what are we going to do this week about your homework? There we can see that we need to pay a lot of attention when we're pushing them into one state or the other. And how we can turn that around. So instead of saying, have you done your homework? What have you done over the week by yourself? Okay, so I'm hearing you didn't have much time. So how do you feel about that? Okay, so what could you change to maybe this week be able to achieve it? How would you feel when you achieve it? And there you can see the different ways of communicating are going to arouse a different response. Now, goal-orientated learning, there's been a lot of research on this, but one of the most recent ones in 2021, I believe a Chinese university, showed that not only do goal-oriented, self-regulated learning lead to academic performance, but it also leads to psychological well-being. And by the way, I think this research should be the greatest advert for professional coaching in a learning environment, because they actually promote and suggest that all universities, educational practitioners develop relevant training programs, workshops, and interventions to cultivate college students to proactively engage in self-regulation behaviors. And ownership of the learning means the one who does the work is the one who does the learning. This is, in fact, Terence Doyle, a neuroscientist, and this, I would say, is one of our mantras. We have to stop doing it for them. We have to stimulate and get them to do more, because we know the more that they do, the more they're going to learn. Sheldon and Kessa, again, researchers demonstrating that autonomously self-regulating students had more goal achievement, more progress, and more well-being. So there's a lot of research demonstrating self-regulated learning. Let's move into the practical side. How are we bringing in the coaching? Well, anybody can call themselves a coach. It is an unregulated business. There's no law stopping anybody. However, Coaching is a skill, and it is a learned skill. I started coaching, well, I started my coaching training back in 2004. So over 20 years now. And believe me, I'm still learning. It is a never-ending journey. And it's not easy because it's about changing the way that we communicate. It's about becoming much more attentive to this, the flinches, the whatever is happening to your coachee, and it's about turning it around. Now, there are certain bodies in the world, certain institutions that set out the standards, the guidelines, the ethics for professional coaching. And the top across the world is the International Coach Federation. This was founded in the 1990s, 1995 to be exact. And they really did set out the gold standard for coaching. Not only do they have programs where they have introduced credentials for professional coaches. So you have life coaches, the ACC level, the PCC level, the MCC level, but also they have accredited programs. They have programs proven to demonstrate coaching skills. Just checking in, is the sound is interrupted. I do have sometimes Spanish internet, which goes into a little bit of a wobbly, as they say. How is the sound now, everybody? Sound okay? Super. Right. And I'm always prepared now. I've got my two computers set up right from the beginning. Okay. I'm getting a little bit of an echo here. So now, yeah. The International Coach Federation has programs to credential coaches into the life coaching credentials, but also accredited programs which are proven to train people to become skilled in professional coaching. Now, we are accredited by the ICF. We have been accredited since 2013. And most of our programs are all with the ICF accreditation. Personally, myself, as I said, I started in 2004 learning to be a professional coach. And I think it was 2016, became an ACC, 2020 became a PCC, and last year came to that MCC level. And believe me, it was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. It's not easy to do. So coaching is a skill, as I mentioned, and the ICF has coaching competences, which are the skills that a professional coach will integrate into all of our coaching conversations. Now, we in Neurolanguage Coaching are integrating all of these competences into everything that we do. The whole process reflects the ICF skill set. What do we introduce from the coaching? I mentioned earlier, we bring in the structure, we bring in the spirit, We bring in the impact for the coachee, which is the self-regulated learning, the learner autonomy, checking in on their motivation and commitment. And above all, we bring in from our side no judgment, a very neutral stance. We are the accountability partner for our learners. But the word that I love the most is we are the soundboard. Now, I know that this is a word that maybe does not exist in all of your languages. It's a very interesting word because in English we use it like a mirror. So we are the mirror reflecting back to our learners to provoke insights. That's the word, soundboard. That's the coach. And through the learning process, that's what we're trying to evoke, those powerful moments of instant insights, which actually reflects into instant learning. And this is what I mentioned earlier. This is probably the dichotomy of coaching in education, because teaching is very directive. I'm here to tell you what to do. I'm here to give you the answers. Coaching is about actually helping you to discover much, much more, the pathway, the knowledge, and the way forward. So interesting. And if we look on the very practical side, we know about the power of words. From the neuroscience, we know that words can induce a stress response, but they could also have the opposite effect. If you are using positive words, it can actually bring in much more coherence across the brain. We know that our questions have an impact. Closed questions are going to shut people down into yes, no, yes, no. Open questions are going to stimulate them to actually bring out more information. Active listening, reformulating, having compassionate conversations, giving positive feedback, and above all, our calm presence. So a lot of our dialogue is very brain friendly. We're bringing in signposting, so we're guiding all the way, psychologically safety. We're bringing in the reformulations to check in. Am I hearing you? Is this what you're saying? Can I just check? By the way, we're also using that as a language tool where we reflect back what they've said, maybe in a corrected way. We're evoking powerful questions, especially around the learning. What could help you at this point? How could you create a bridge here? What would you need that's going to help you to remind yourself of this? How do you feel about this? What could we do to change the way that you're feeling? These types of questions to stimulate them to think for themselves. Non-directive means we're not telling them what to do. We're not giving commands. We're softening the commands with, may I ask you? How about, what do you think if? So the whole approach is downtoned and they don't feel like they're at school. Positivity, acknowledgement, recognition. I'd love to just take a moment to all of you for being here with me on a Saturday morning. Notice how good it makes people feel when they're recognized just for a moment. And we need to do more of that in the learning. I'd love to recognize you for the effort that you've put into this. I'd love to recognize you for the time you've taken here to do this. Staying away from the why questions as well, especially the why, which is to do with how they are behaving or feeling or reacting. Why did you say that word? Why did you use that? Really can go straight to the emotional and bring out a very defensive response. What we change it for is, I'm curious, what's the reason for using that word? Using the word curiosity and changing it into what is the reason for
you're going to get it straight into this rational, logical, analytical center. And they're going to give you a much more rational, logical response without the emotion. And as I said, you're soundboarding when they say, I don't know how to do this. Well, what could you try? What, imagine that you were able to do this. Turning it around, bouncing it back. I always call this like a ping pong. When they say no, we're pushing it back to them to say, how can we help you here? Now, the one thing that we are doing, we as the educator, we're going to start to be very conscious of everything that we say. And that's not easy because most of what we do as teachers and educators is automatic. We say things without thinking. We ask questions without thinking. And what we are doing now is we're turning the mirror on us to start to reflect and be conscious of everything that we say and noticing the impact on them. And that's a skill. That really is a skill. Now, we said that coaching also is about the structural change of the learning. And we do get our learners into SMART goals. We actually have two different focus points for our goals. We have mechanical goals, which are focused on the grammar, structure, and pronunciation, and mastery, which is focused on functional language. So we are dividing the language into those two different focus points. And we're looking to get our learner to set very specific goals. The more specific, the more measurable. Now, again, this is a skill to take your learner through this goal setting. How many of you have got learners who say, when you say, what do you want to achieve? They say, I want to be fluent. I want to be able to communicate. I want to be able to have conversations. Super, but what does that mean? That's far too generic. Who are you talking to? What are you talking about? How does that conversation go? Let's analyze that conversation. Let's break it down. Let's get it much more specific. And the one difference that we actually do with our goal settings is we get our learners to choose and set their goals. I get so many teachers saying to me, oh, we already set the goals. I set the goals for my learner. We don't do that. We work with our learners choosing and setting their own goals. Remember, it's the ownership. It's the learner autonomy that's key and at the root of everything that we do. So they set their goals, they set their activities, they set their time period, and we reveal or uncover their motivation and their commitment to this process. And it becomes a very cyclical process because you're setting goals, working on them, and then we sit down and do a goal review. Have you achieved the goals? Where are you with this? And if my coachee says no, okay, with pleasure, we can still work on them. If the coachee says yes, okay, we can set new goals. And we go into another goal setting. And as I mentioned, professional coaching also is used for troubleshooting. And as we said earlier, at any point in that learning process, if I'm sensing there is a question about time management or an emotional trigger coming up, or something has happened and they need some coaching around it, or they need to understand how to learn, we're going to go into that coaching conversation. They're not very long, but they are extremely effective and powerful to help, I'm going to say, recalibrate those moments. And we also work with coaching models. Now, for those of you who are new to coaching, Back in the 1970s, Sir John Whitmore was the first to create a coaching model called the GROW model. Whenever you hear the words coaching model, what it actually means is a pathway through the conversation. And his model, G for goals, R for reality, O for outcomes, obstacles, and W for way forward. And he used that acronym to guide the coach through that conversation with the learner. Now, I've created models that we use in the language coaching process. For example, in the troubleshooting conversations, we follow the model, which is fact-finding, exploring, and way forward. And with compassionate conversations, we've got fact-finding, recognition, encouragement, and moving forwards. And for grammar, we've got placement, assessment, conversation, teaching, powerful questions, and clarification. And these create almost like roadmaps for us, the coach, to follow. And the one for grammar actually helps us to stay in the shoes of the coach in any grammar conversation. So we're not just teaching at them, we're involving them with this coaching approach of grammar. We are getting people to actually love grammar because of the way we approach it. So we've looked at the professional coaching, we've looked at how we are incorporating that into all that we do. Just as an aside, I think a minute ago I saw Attila. I saw you had made a comment which was beautiful. We must know ourselves very well, and that's not easy. And you are so right. And really, us as the educator, we have to know ourselves extremely well and be able to control the way that we communicate. Yes. So thank you for that comment. Beautiful. And to have effective conversation, we have to be good listeners. Ollie, yes, removing our coaching shoes and dancing in the space of the learner. Absolutely, yes. Thank you for that. So let's go a little bit into the neuro. We touched a little bit on it earlier. I do think that we are bridging the theory to the practice. We're bringing the neuro in from these three different perspectives. Firstly, from the meta perspective, talking about the brain with our learners, bringing in the self-awareness, provoking connections, associations. Secondly, we're helping them to optimize learning processes to promote their learner autonomy. And thirdly, we're implementing the neuroscientific principles. Everything that we do has a reason. And we mentioned earlier the power of words. Here is some of that research. As I mentioned, negative words can really activate the stress response. And positive words can totally activate the lower regions of the brain and bring in much more coherence across the brain. So paying attention to words is key. Let's just talk a minute about the proof of introducing metacognition into the classrooms. One of the greatest powerhouses promoting metacognition has been Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck, back in 2012, I believe, published the growth mindset book as opposed to fixed mindset. And a lot of her research was based on her findings with children. And in the middle research, the research there shows when we tell children, you can change your brain is plastic, you can learn, you can become more intelligent. In this particular research, it was demonstrated to have an impact on their results. 2020, they did similar research with a group of French kiddies. Again, giving them messages like, you can change your brain, you can learn, you can become more intelligent. In this particular research, it didn't impact the results, but it impacted the way they were learning. It impacted their performance. Better organized, better planning, more self-confidence. And the top research is a review of all the research touching upon metacognition in schools. And what is the effectiveness of doing this? And in fact, the research concludes, yes, when we bring in that metacognition, we help them to learn how to learn. We help them to come into self-regulating processes. We help them to understand themselves. It leads to better results, better performance, and more motivation. Now, over the past 14 years, neurolanguage coaches across the world have been working with their learners, me too. And definitely what we see is that when people start to understand themselves, it totally transforms their learning process. It really does. And in many, many, many cases, they're learning faster and more efficiently. Last December, I was working with a young German, late 20s. He'd left school at 16, 17, disillusioned, disappointed, never got on with the teachers. The teachers took him as being a great problem. He felt he couldn't learn. He felt he was terrible at learning. He and I started a journey to learn Spanish. And he was about an A1 when he came to me in December. He worked with me for 12 weeks, 12 sessions. In those 12 sessions, he totally transformed his whole belief about himself. At the end of the course, he was actually coming into a B1 level after 12 weeks. And he literally said, I now know that I can learn. I now know, and I'm confident that I can learn anything. That for me was the greatest, most beautiful transformation. Not the fact that he'd done so well in Spanish, but the fact that he'd regained his trust in himself, which none of his teachers had given him throughout his schooling life. And that now hopefully fuels our learners to go and do other things. That's about empowerment. That really is, I would say, the essence of coaching. We talk about neuroplasticity with our learners. We talk about the fact that the brain can change. We talk about the fact that there's no age for learning. Learning should be a lifelong process for all of us. And we look at the research, we look at how actually even we can reverse brain aging. There's research on the people that they call the super agers. Super agers are people in their 90s with brilliant brains. And the researchers were curious, what is it that gets these people to have such amazing brains in their 90s where 50-year-olds don't have such amazing brains? And they discovered 3 factors. They all engaged in mental exercise, they all engaged in physical exercise, and above all, they had amazing social connections. Those were the 3 factors. Ollie, I couldn't agree more with you. Throwing away that television is actually, I think, one of our greatest recommendations to anybody. Yes. And even nowadays, isn't it interesting? We're living in a new era without books, without writing. And we know that writing actually engages spatial navigation in the brain. And I know that when I write something, I remember it. And they actually say that just writing on the computer doesn't stimulate the same brain networks as writing does. And we're losing the writing, we're losing the books in the hands. How can we stimulate to bring these back? Lots of research about the neuroplasticity. We talk about this with our learners. We talk about fight or flight with our learners. We really do go into conversations. Obviously, we ask permission first. How open would you be to talk about this with me? Can I just check with you? Fight or flight is key, and key to talk about it from their standpoint. Because each and every one of us experience fight or flight. It is the way that we have survived through history. And in the previous slide, you saw Walter Cannon was the American physiologist who realized that we react the same as animals do when there is danger, when we are under threat. These are the modern interpretations. We've gone even further. We've even got this fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Fawn is the people-pleasing state. And talking about the emotional state with our learners is key. As we mentioned before, language learning can make us feel very vulnerable. And if we feel under threat, it can actually impact the learning mechanisms in the brain. From the research back in 2002, over 20 years ago, we see that the anxiety from mathematics, now we could say language learning could be even worse than mathematics for some people, diminishes working memory capacity, diminishes attention, and diminishes prefrontal cortex functions. Now, in a nutshell, if you have a learner who has activated that sympathetic nervous system because they feel under threat, the fight or flight has kicked in, the survival brain is kicking in, the areas of the brain that we need for learning, namely prefrontal cortex functions and hippocampus, are starting to be depleted of resources. They can't learn. One of the first things that actually maybe we lose control of is speech. I know that when I get very stressed or I get very psychologically threatened, my speech capacity absolutely diminishes. Even my native language, I get very tongue-tied. And that's in my native language. So imagine in another language. I remember when I moved to Spain in my teens, and I was working in an office at one point for some months. I refused to answer the telephone. Whenever the telephone rang, and I thought I was the only one there, I would shut down, start shaking, go into a corner, and want to hide. How I wish somebody had taught me through that and explained to me, Rachel, that's normal. That's normal. That's a normal response because you're actually starting to feel under threat. Interestingly as well, just the thought of doing something. So the thought of doing mathematics in the research in 2012, what they could see, that anticipation, the anxiety aroused by that triggered the pain areas of the brain. So just imagine your learners who have to give a presentation or have to go to a meeting and speak in English, or they have to answer the telephone. For me, answering the telephone was provoking the triggering of the pain areas plus the fight or flight. So really, really something that we have to open and talk about with the learners. Talk about social pain. Talk about what happens when we are feeling that social emotional pain. Talk about fight or flight, what's happening. Help them to understand it's a physiological reaction and it's normal. Then we have to move into, I'm just going to go back to that slide a minute. We have to move into strategies. We also maybe need to understand what's triggering this pain, what's triggering this reaction. And there may be certain emotional triggers that we can detect together and start to strategize. For example, is it status? Is it when you're sitting in front of your boss, you're terrified because of his status and you're feeling inferior, you're feeling your language is not good enough, and that's going to make you go into that threat state? Or is it frustration? Is it fairness? Something's unfair, like I'm being sent to this session. Or is it xenoglossophobia? Anxiety to speak the language. Some people do have that anxiety to speak a foreign language. So there could be many triggers, but I actually also think one of the greatest triggers of all, bad learning memories. Bad learning memories from school. My teacher said I was terrible at this. My teacher said I should never pronounce this. My pronunciation was awful, so I should never go and talk to anybody. You know, we have had teachers telling us some horrible things in the past. And that stays with us on a very subconscious level. And that could constantly be triggering that threat response. So talking about this with our learners actually normalizes it. And coaching them around those triggers is a skill that helps them then to come into what I call a learning state. Now, another aspect that we need to talk about with our learners is the implicit input, the explicit input, the conscious learning, the subconscious learning. You know, we learn our native language on a very subconscious level. Implicit learning, procedural memory. But it takes us about 5 or 6 years to learn our native language, which is a long time. When we get to school, then they take us into explicit learning. You know, the blackboard and everything is being taught and told, and it's a lot of conscious input, rational, logical, analytical, critical thinking. Personally, I started learning French at 8, school. When I left at 16, I still couldn't speak. That was 8 years. 8 years of French. I do think we need to talk to learners about this, because if you only learn with implicit or if you only learn with explicit, it's going to take a long time. When you put them together, you can learn extremely quickly. Just imagine the immersion setting. Just imagine you go to live in England. You're bombarding your brain, you're bombarding the subconscious with the language 24/7. Television, radio, metro, on the street, the coffee shop, the restaurant, everywhere you're receiving subconscious input. And on top of that, if you're doing classes, if you're coming into the learning from an explicit learning, learning the rules, learning the grammar, etc., you could learn the language in 1 year. implicit plus explicit, you can learn very quickly. Now, one of the questions for all of your learners, and one of the questions that we ask all of our learners is, how can you replicate the immersion setting from where you are living now? Because in this day and age, you can. When I moved to Spain in the 1980s, you couldn't. But with all of the technology that we have nowadays, yes, you can. Telephone in English, computer in English, everything in English, watching films, internet, papers, books, everything in English. And get them to try it for 3 months. Maybe it could be like a little challenge. Explicit learning, implicit input. In many ways, this is connecting in with Krashen's amazing work, which is the language learning and the language acquisition. When you've got both of them together, that's when you start to propel the learning, to boost it. So all of these conversations are key. And definitely we see from the research that you've got different brain networks underlying the two types of learning. So it's key to engage the explicit and the implicit. And just a little bit more, the explicit is the learning theory, the grammar, the rules. The implicit is actually the subconscious input, getting into the flow and replicating the immersion. I've even had learners where we've sat together and we've looked at our personalized roadmap, which we are going to follow, but then we've created a personalized roadmap of subconscious input that learner would follow during the week. So what are you going to do on Monday that's going to bring in that subconscious input? What about Tuesday? What about Wednesday? And every single day they had something on that subconscious input. And this is where I do think it's interesting that we have to understand the relevance and the importance of the subconscious. And this also leads us into brainwaves. I do believe that when we understand more the rhythms of the brain, the brainwave activity, we can understand more about brain states. And in fact, as I mentioned before, we get into mechanical goals, mastery goals. Mechanical goals, what I'm trying to induce are the beta brainwaves, which are the very fast processing of information, critical thinking, rational, logical, grammar theory, all of that discussion and learning. On the other side, the mastery, what we're trying to induce is the flow state, getting people to speak without thinking, getting people to flow with the language. And we're trying to connect them into those different states. The more we understand about the brainwaves, the more we understand about brain states. And the more we really understand that, visual perception, action observation is key as well in the learning process. So experiential learning plus observed learning is key. In this particular research, they had a group of English who were fascinated by the Japanese experts in distinguishing the gender of baby chicks. Now, that's actually quite a miracle because when you look at a baby chick, they look exactly the same. But the Japanese were experts in detecting male, female. So the English went to the Japanese and asked them, how do you do it? And the Japanese actually replied, we don't know. We just know. We just do it. So they ended up with the Japanese working together with the British and the British picking up the chick and deciding male or female, and the Japanese were saying yes or no until the British became experts. They kept doing it. They kept doing it. If they got it wrong, if they got it right, and that way the visual perception actually led them to becoming experts in determining the male and female. So we cannot underestimate what is coming in on a subconscious level visually as well. And in this particular research, we had a group of people learning to improve their golf shot. And the group that improved the most were the ones who observed an expert first. So how can you get your learners to go away and watch people in business meetings, watch people giving presentations, watch people in those conversations? How do they interact? What do they say? What language do they use? What do they bring in to that mix of conversation? And helping them to understand there are many, many ways of learning. It's not just about the theory. And understanding the brain chemistry, talking to our learners about the brain chemistry, talking to them about the dopamine. Dopamine is key for learning. It's key for retention. It's key for motivation. How do we get more dopamine? Well, absolutely with positivity, curiosity, variety, novelty. Plus the importance of scaffolding, provoking connections, helping them to fill the gaps where they don't know something. How can I help them to fulfill those gaps or springboard from native into the target? And the research that demonstrates this springboarding from 2016. The brain actually, when we're learning a new language, is going to the native grammar areas to see if it can connect, to see if it can reuse the characteristics of our native language. So in neurolanguage coaching, we're constantly asking, how is this in your language? How is it different? How is it similar? Where are the differences? Let's talk it through. Does this exist in your language? In many of your languages, the article doesn't exist. Continuous tenses don't exist. Present perfect, past simple, the difference doesn't exist. So I'm also going to help you to feel calm with this, because I'm going to explain that this may not exist in your brain. We may have to create new neural networks here from scratch, because there's nothing for you to scaffold from. And all of this is connecting into a process which is very focused on managing cognitive overload. Everything is broken down, chunked down, step by step, building them up with the language. We become experts on helping them to break the language down. Chunking down is our absolute key to the whole process of neurolanguage coaching, whether it's grammar, whether it's functional language, whatever it is, we're breaking it down. And remember, we said about setting goals. The goals are a chunk of the language. We work on that, and then we set new goals, and then we set new goals. So it's a managed chunking down. And we also pay attention to spacing. If we look at something today, when do we revisit it? Even asking my learner, when are you going to revisit this? Let's talk about spacing techniques. I think most of us know, most of you know about the forgetting curve, famously from the 1800s, the research of Ebbinghaus. And the research showing the spaced repetition as a strategy for learning. Now, there is so much that we are inputting from the neuroscience. If you imagine all of this knowledge, as a neurolanguage coach, you're going to then manage when you are bringing this to the learner, when you're bringing it out into a coaching conversation, when you're bringing it out as a golden nugget of information to help them. And above all, everything that we do is about making the learning relevant for them. real and personal for them. That's absolutely key. Many years ago, there was a book called Making It Stick. And they looked at all the different top research ways that were helping to learn, to memorize. This was the top one. When the brain receives information connecting to that real and personal, relevant to the learner, that is the most effective way for learning. And this is why I always say books are fantastic, but we need to move away from the books. Books are great for self-study. They're great to consolidate. They're great to trigger, but then it's about them transforming what's in the books and connecting it to them, relating it to their lives. And you are the one that has to do that. Help them to connect. So is neurolanguage coaching for any learner? Yes, absolutely. Maybe I'm going to caveat that with children under the age of 8 learn in a totally different way. They learn through experience, through observation, through play, through repetition. So children under the age of 8, it's not so easy to get them to set goals. But you can still try to instigate their autonomy, what they like, what they don't, help them with simple language to understand the learning process, but you can help them with very simple language to regulate themselves. A couple of years ago, we had a French kindergarten teacher do the course, and she beautifully took on board the neuroscience part and explaining to the little kiddies about the brain. And in fact, Daniel Siegel, you can all go and look for this on the internet, talks about the hand brain. And he shows children, you can show children, this is the brain. So this is your neck, this is the brain, and inside is the amygdala. And normally when the brain is very calm, it's the amygdala is living happily inside, very calmly. But then suddenly something's happened, or there's stress, or there is a threat, and the prefrontal cortex at the front here runs away, and the amygdala comes out with stress and afraid and shouting and screaming or whatever. And she took this on board and she used it as a way to explain to the children, look, if this happens to you or you're feeling this, show me. And then we can all come together. We can try to calm you down. We can do some breathing. We can go into play. We can sit down together and see what you need. And she also said to them, children, when I do it, you know, that's how I'm feeling. So she also used it as an indicator to show them when they were stressing her. And she said it was beautiful. The kids started to communicate with her, and they started as a group to be able to manage those moments of stress much, much more. Now, I also know that we've had quite a few along the years of our coaches talking to their children about the brain. And I will never forget one of our coaches was moving to Japan. She was moving back to Japan, and her little boy of 5 was starting to have panic attacks. And she sat him down and she explained to him, this is your brain. It's trying to protect you. It's feeling that you don't know what's happening. It's the unknown. And your brain is going into this state because it's trying to protect you. Now, if this happens, what I would like is that you tell me, and immediately we're going to come in and try to see how we can calm you down. And he would come to her and say, Mummy, Mummy, my brain's starting again. And they'd sit down, breathe, troubleshoot. This was about 7 or 8 years ago. And I spoke to her last year and said, how is he? And she said, he's amazing. He comes and tells me to go and sit down and de-stress. He manages his brain beautifully. Now, that for me is an example of children now growing up managing, optimizing, strategizing their brain functions, states, capacity. How amazing it would be to have a world of kids doing that, plus adults as well. So kiddies under the age of 8, slightly different, but teenagers, absolutely ideal for this process. Adults, absolutely. Special needs, absolutely. We had a group of our coaches who were volunteers for a foundation in Italy for children with special needs. Those children were having great problems in school. With our coaches, they were starting to excel. Unbelievable. Can it be used for exam practice? Yes, it can. The way that we separate the mechanical, the mastery, the mechanical will then focus on the grammatical, the mastery will then focus on the exam and what needs to happen to achieve that exam. Can it be used for any language? Yes. This is a framework. This is a framework and a systemized approach which can be used for the learning of any language. It's absolutely transportable. And for lower levels, yes, it can be used for beginners. The only caveat there is you must be able to communicate with that learner in another language, or the native language, or another language. Remember, I spoke about my German client last December? We spoke in English, and from English, he was springboarding into Spanish. So we had a common language that we were using as the communicative vehicle for the coaching. So we're coming to the end of the webinar. I know it's a lot of information. We really do pack in a lot of information into everything that we do in neurolanguage coaching. It is a very holistic approach. And as I mentioned, we're bringing in the neuro and we're bringing in the coaching to create a structured, systematized approach to language learning. 21st century learning, I think, yes, I think this is where all of us are going. And I think it's about bringing back the joy to learning. I love this quote by Moyatsis and McKee, this joyful discovery, playful creation, flowing performance. So how can we bring back the joy to learning? Well, if any of you are interested to become a neurolanguage coach, when I started this in 2012, for me, it was the great desire to really assist teachers in this shift because we are changing. And the course itself is 36 hours. It is accredited by the ICF since 2013. And it is for all types of language teachers, trainers, coaches, educators. Now, we do have a parallel course, which is the Neuro Heart Education course, which is for any teacher except language. And the pathway for neurolanguage coaching, you've got the first step, which is the language coaching certification. And honestly, at that point, you become a fully certified and accredited neurolanguage coach. You don't need to go any further unless you want to. If you do want to go further, you can take the pathway into becoming an advanced coach, a professional neurolanguage coach, even a teacher trainer. And our teacher trainers are delivering our courses in their country, in their languages. And we're now just over, I don't know the exact number, Elsa will probably know, we're over 2,000 neurolanguage coaches across the world. These coaches are present in about 85 different countries. We have teacher trainers who are from 13 different languages. And we definitely have the most beautiful, like-minded, connected, heartfelt network It's pretty unbelievable, this network. Ollie is part of this network, as you can see the hearts coming out of that. And this was, in fact, 2 weeks ago, where we were at the Neurolanguage Coaching Conference in Sitges. I think we're all still reverberating. Goodness, Ollie, was it last week? I'm still feeling like I'm lost in space and time. We had 3 days together, 3 days with amazing speakers, amazing participants. Next year, again, we will be back in Sitges, I believe. I'm still waiting for people to give me my feedback on whether they want us to be in Sitges or somewhere else. But it really is the occasion where all of us come together. And you remember that self-determination theory, that feeling of belonging. It is extremely prominent within this network. And I have never met such a self-centered, non-self-centered network. Self is totally lost when you come into this network. Everybody helps each other, everybody cooperates, collaborates, and everybody supports each other. The support for the speakers and for the participants was phenomenal. It really was. So hopefully we see you next year, 2027, for the 11th edition of the conference. Now, if you are interested to become a neurolanguage coach, we are offering a discount if you actually do the free e-course. Now, the free e-course is focused on changing the way that we communicate. And it gives you some starting points to bring in that metacognition and to observe yourselves and to bring in these nuances of change in the way that you are communicating with your learners. And if you complete this course, you would then have automatically a 10% off the full course. And these are the next courses coming up. We do have a couple of courses with me on the 9th of June in the morning, the 17th of June in the evening. We have a weekend course with Juan Carlos on the 20th. And if any of you would like to visit Athens and be present for a face-to-face, I'm actually going to be doing that in July. On top, thank you for visiting today, this webinar. And for this attendance, we're also offering an additional 10% off the course. So if any of you sign up today from this webinar, you would have then an additional 10%. The books are available on Amazon. The first book, as I said, was rewritten. So a new edition in 2025, very recent, lots more research, lots more, let's say, up to date, because it has been such a journey these last 14 years of neurolanguage coaching. The second book, Brain Friendly Grammar, through Express Publishing. And the third book is very much a book of materials, brain-friendly materials that I suggest you co-create with your learners. It's not about giving them the material, it's about you sitting with them and co-creating it with them. So thank you, everybody. I think I've gone a little bit over the time of an hour and a quarter, which I said would be how long I would take for this webinar. I'm very much open to any questions you may have if you would like us to go into questions. Or comments. Oh, Ollie, thank you so much. I miss all of you so much after those days together. It's phenomenal. Afterwards, where is everybody? Yes. I'm trying to see if there's any questions in the chat box. No questions, comments? Anything else that you would like to know about? Hermione, always beautiful to see you and connect with you. How are you?
And thank you. Can you hear me without my headset?
Beautifully.
Very quickly, I wanted to make rather a question. It comes through when I read a lot that the pain for things that we lose is greater than the pain that we've got something. And I would like to compliment what you are saying, the accountability, our accountability as a catalyst for them to bring this point ahead. What would you lose? It's just another way of saying, how can I help you to do that? Just to bring it home. It's psychology, but then it's part of what you were saying to us. I just wanted to make this because it came the last couple of months and I've been away from these webinars. I wanted to just bring this point, our accountability role as a catalyst for them to get in touch with that. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much,
Hermione.
Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. And beautiful addition. And yes, you know, when we go into that coaching space, there are a range of questions that are going to get them going into that deeper thinking space. And yes, that's one of the questions which is key. And it helps also to understand, well, what have I got? Definitely. So, Hermione, thank you for that. Beautiful. Yes. Tiana, you know, thank you for that comment. I think all of us, even me, you know, when I was training for 20 years and working with clients and trying to understand, you know, what is it that you need? What is it that I'm doing? And it was very difficult for me to even capture what it is. And I have to say, I'm grateful along the way to all even the negative moments that I had with HR managers and people saying, well, what are you doing? Language coaching. Well, what is that? And I will never, ever forget. I had a very painful meeting with a human resource manager in 2000, I think it was 2010, 2011. And he sat in this meeting saying to me, what is language coaching? It's nothing but glorified teaching. Why should we pay you more money for this? And in many ways, I came out of that meeting thinking, well, crying because it was pretty offensive. My secretary was with me and she was crying as well. That's how bad it was. But then I thought, well, actually, you know, he's right, because there needs to be a crystallized structure to this. And that was the fuel for me to go away and create a crystallized structure. And this is what I'm seeing. This is key. We cannot just go into saying, well, language coaching is this sort of coaching around. No, there has to be a structure to the learning, because at the end of the day, we're helping them to learn a language. And language learning, there has to be a systematization behind it. So yes, Tiana, I agree with you. It's something that we're all striving for, but I'm grateful for those negative moments which pushed me into it to create the structure. And it's been evolving since 2012. It really has. And I'm learning from all of you as well. Still. Tiana, did you want to jump on?
Yeah, another thing that I found really, really hard to connect with my students about is helping them find this determination within themselves. I've been trying to organize their learning journey by helping them tap, as I've written, tap into their interests, get them to find whatever it is that guides them throughout their daily life.
Yeah.
And include learning a language. So to make everything about learning a language, whatever it is that makes their daily functioning. But they kind of find it interesting at the beginning, but then they lose this, they lose the motivation, so to say. This consistency, persistency, and determination is really, really hard to help them find within themselves and keep it going for a longer period of time.
Yeah. How old are they?
Yeah, I work mostly with adults, so working for
Right.
professionals.
Right.
Finding
Right.
their motivation is really, really much harder than when working with kids.
Yeah.
With kids, it's all about play and
Yeah.
some joyful activities, but with adults, it's a
Yeah.
lot of self-doubt, embarrassment.
Yes. Yeah. And if I can share a couple of things coming up from that. Firstly, as adults, we confuse motivation with commitment. So we have to separate out what's motivation, vision, intrinsic feelings for the learning, the passion, the drive, but what's the problems in the process? I don't have time. I don't want to do this. I'm overloaded. That's process problems. So if we can get them into a vision, so what's going to change your life? Imagine you've got this. Just imagine you're fluent at work. How's that going to change your life? I had one lady say to me, I could save time. Okay, what are you going to do with that time? I'm going to go on the golf course. Great. So can I keep reminding you that every single time that you're with me, you're going to be saving time eventually and going to be on that golf course? And that's what we need to keep bringing back. That's the vision. And it might be something that is totally off the chart, but it's what's going to keep them there. Now, at the same time, we also have to tap in if there's no motivation and be honest. And a lot of them are sent to us. And there it's about the compassion. I know that you've been sent. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry that you're being forced to be here. What other areas of your life could benefit from this? Even who could benefit? I've had some of my business clients saying, oh, I could help my child with his homework. How would that make you feel? Oh man, it would make me feel great because I feel so stupid because I don't understand. Brilliant. Shall we use that as the key motivation then? So it's tapping into maybe around it. And if there's nothing, then it's about tapping into the process and being honest. Look, there's nothing you want it for. It won't change your life. You don't want to continue with it, but we've got to be here. Your boss has sent you. I've got to be here. So what can we do to make the process interesting for you so that you're going to get through that door every week and be here with me? And then we go into the process. So Tiana, I totally agree with you. It's not easy. And especially because people are stressed, overloaded, overworked, underpaid. They don't want anything on top of that. Yeah.
And there's always a time factor. I don't have time. I can't find. I always do my homework the night before or the morning before.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, when I've got clients like that, I move into that conversation of the intrinsic learning. And intrinsic subconscious input means you don't have to do anything. Just have it in the background. And that's enough. Because if you don't have time to do your homework, you don't have time to do things, don't do it. Don't force yourself because that's going to bring in the negative feelings. So just expose and bombard your brain to the language whenever you can. Even if it's lying asleep at midnight on the sofa, falling asleep with the movie in the background in English, that's fine. That's subconscious input. Yeah. Yeah. So conversations like these, actually, they're also geared to help them feel better about the learning process. Because so many of our learners feel bad about the learning process nowadays. Tiana, thank you for sharing. Any other questions or comments? Jota, you're saying that you have similar difficulties with teachers that you mentor. Yes. Yeah. It is how to find that vision and drive and passion. Definitely. So, everybody, thank you for being with me over the past hour and 3/4. Hopefully, the time flowed for you and we got you into a bit of a flow state. If you do have any further questions, do let us know. Oh, Roshini, sorry, let me see. Where is your question? Do you want to come on the microphone? I'm trying to see if I can look back and find it. Okay, you're in the 5th year of being a wonderful educator. How can you practice NLC in your classes with young learners? Okay, so I definitely would encourage you to talk about the brain with the learners, even in baby language, simplified. I would encourage you to have a look at the work of Carol Dweck, where she talks about neuroplasticity, how the brain can change, even with younger learners. I would bring in a lot more changes to the way I communicate with the kiddies, a lot more permission. How about, what do you think if, what if we move into this? May we, could we? Just being more gentle with them and open questions, finding out what they want. How would you all like to do this? What activities would you all like? What activities could we introduce? And maybe we have different groups of people doing different things. Maybe you've got a goal for that learning, and this is what we need to learn today, but I'm going to give you a choice of how you get there. Some of you might want to go and create some mind maps. Some of you might want to go and create drawings. Some of you might want to create a script. Some of you might want to do role plays. How do you want to do it? And I would get them much more involved in the process of learning and get them much more into understanding themselves. So, Roshini, those would be my tips. Obviously, if you came onto the course, there would be a lot more. Any other questions or comments before we close today?
I'm sorry, I would like to ask a
Valeria.
question.
Yes.
I actually have the question regarding the continuous learning. You have mentioned that, for example, we need to explain our learners that it is important here to expose ourselves to continuous, let's say, English listening, for example, on the background, that they can do something by small portions every day better. Let's say much better than, for example, sit down and work for 1-2 hours only during 1 day or 2 days, and then during the week they don't want to study something, to repeat, to revise, or to learn. Well, actually, I would like to mention that I have some adult learners, and I try to explain this to them, but I would like also to listen your professional opinion on this topic. For example, what exactly would be nice to mention to them to justify that, yes, this would be really effective strategy for you. You just need to find that time, even if it can be 10 minutes or 15 minutes every day, which can be much more efficient for you to learn and progress in language learning than just finding 1 hour or 2 hours 1 day a week.
So I think there's various things to unpack there. And thank you, Valeria. And honestly, I'd love to say, well done that you're explaining this to your learners. Now, I do think we need to distinguish here a lot more the explicit from the implicit. Because actually, even just implying to carve out any amount of time, that is pointing towards the explicit learning of, even if it's 5-10 minutes, finding time to do something. Now, actually, implicit learning, I don't want you to do anything. I want you to do something else with that language in the background. So maybe you're cooking with a podcast, or maybe you're writing something with the television on in the background, or the radio on. So it really is that subconscious murmuring that you do not have to pay attention to. That's implicit subconscious input. That's language acquisition. And this is the difference, between watching a film where I'm trying to listen to everything, capture every word, make notes, that's explicit, or lying on the sofa half asleep and it's just washing over me. That's implicit. So I would try to explain to learners, both are effective. But as adults, we often think that explicit learning is the only way. So may I remind you, my learner, you learnt your native language implicitly. That's how you learnt your native language. And by the way, let's be honest, everybody, institutionalized language learning has only existed over the last 200 years, or maybe 300. Christopher Columbus didn't have a grammar book. The Romans didn't have a grammar book. The Silk Road merchants didn't have a grammar book. How did they learn? And this is the truth that we need to speak to our learners about, because our learners are so institutionalized and so grammar orientated or theory and rational thinking orientated that we forget the power of the subconscious. So Valeria, I would definitely open up that space first about explicit, implicit. Now, the other thing that you're mentioning is really this breaking it down and spacing it out. And that's where you'd go into the research on cognitive overload and also spaced repetition. And yes, you're right. This drip, 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 drip is much more effective than the woof, all in one go. And that's what we're trying to say in this case. What you're trying to say is, 10 minutes. When could you have the 10 minutes every day, maybe with your coffee, that you're doing something? And just if you're just bringing it back and just bringing it back and just bringing it back. So yes, absolutely. I would then demonstrate with the research. And in many ways, everybody, I always say we use the neuroscience, the research, as our weapon. We use it as the reason for doing things. And one of the major missions of the brain is to understand. So instead of you, Valeria, saying, look, how about breaking it down? When you explain it, then they understand the reason that you're saying that. Does that help, Valeria?
Yes, it helps a lot. I have also noticed that, actually, I try to mention also some researchers because I have discovered recently that there is a Norwegian scientist, a woman who researched the influence of handwriting on our brain, and it is very influential and it has a very great impact on our memory as well. So I try to incorporate it into my classes a lot. And yes, I see the difference that my students perceive this information in a different way because they hear that, okay, there is a scientist who has investigated these for the recent 10 years, for example, for 5 years. But also I have noticed that I would say sometimes I feel that for example, some adults, they want to try to make excuses that, okay, I don't have time to do it, or I'm very busy this week. And actually this is repetitive. Every week they are very busy. And I'm not sure what should I do in such cases if they try to find these excuses that I'm busy, I have a lot of work to do, I'm a student, I need to study medicine. And then at the end of the day, I find that we're not progressing at all.
So there I would bring in the compassion, because the truth of the matter is they are very busy, they are overloaded, they are in a problem. Let's say they're in crisis. So I would then go into compassion and say, look, I'm really sorry. I know that you're so busy. So may we talk about implicit learning? And implicit learning means don't do anything. I don't want you to carry the stress and the negativity of feeling obliged. However, may we talk about subconscious input? And then I'd open up that conversation that we've just had about subconscious input and get them to try it out. Now, I had a CEO of an airport for many, many years. Lady, by the way, beautiful to work with a lady CEO. Very stressed and very angry because she was a B2 and she was on that plateau and she wanted to get better and she didn't have time. And every week, yes, I'll do something at home. Never did. Every week, frustration, frustration, frustration. I got to a point where I said, maybe we talk about this because I'm sensing this is really upsetting you. and it's bringing in the negativity to the learning process. May we talk about subconscious input? So we opened up that conversation and I said, okay, how would you feel if let's have a test. Let's try this out for 3 months. Let's put it to the test. How can you create immersion where you're living and get this subconscious input? And after 3 months, let's check in and see if there's anything happened. So she put her phone in English, her telephone in English, her computer in English. She literally had to buy a television because she didn't have one to watch things in English, documentaries, etc. She only read in English, magazines, internet, everything. She got her partner to speak to her in English. She got certain people at work to speak with her in English. So she did it. After 2.5 months, I hadn't seen her for a couple of weeks, and we had a call to check in. And she said, Rachel, I now understand what you mean. Because I was sitting in a meeting the other day and I came out with a word that I have never in my life said before. And the word was beneath. And as soon as I said it, I thought, where did that come from? And then I thought, Rachel! Those were her exact words. That was all the proof she needed. That was all the proof she needed to recognize something was happening. And that was it. That was it. For, she then continued. She's now got through that barrier because she now understands. That's all you need. So I would say, Valeria, go into lots of compassion. I know that you're so busy, so let's forget the homework for now. Let's forget it. Don't want you to be stressed. Don't want you to be pressured. I really want you to come into joy in this learning process. What can we do to bring back the joy? What can we do to bring in the subconscious input? What would you like to do that's going to help you to move forwards in this process? And lots of open questions. And get them to take that responsibility and ownership. Hopefully that helped, Valeria, a little bit.
Thank you for your answer.
Yes, I'll let you go and try it. And with pleasure, you can drop me a line and let me know how it works. Thank you, everybody, for the last couple of hours for being with me on a Saturday morning. Next week, we have our next webinar, I believe. Do we, Elsa? Yes, we do. So with pleasure next Saturday. Looking forward to seeing you here as well. Have a beautiful rest of the weekend, everybody. Shall we all say goodbye together? Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, 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 bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.